Hey, I'm Nick Tomadio, and welcome to Season 7, Episode 23 of Music is Not a Genre, MxG. The hand gesture tutorial is free. Thank you, as always, for watching and listening. Listeners, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. You get a video for every episode of this podcast. Watchers, go to nicktomadio.com/musicisnotagenre, and you can click and listen anywhere if you'd rather not watch. And everyone, go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre to support this podcast, my band Rec, and everything I do. And please, wherever you are listening or watching, like and share and subscribe and rate and all of that stuff. Put a review. All of it matters. All of it counts. And I appreciate all of it. And as I mentioned last week, I've got a new song coaching service. And if you go to nicktomadio.com/song coaching, or just nicktomadio.com, it's right there on the menu, song coaching. You will find out what that means. But essentially, if you're at any point in the process of songwriting, whether you are a rank beginner, you have one line, you have a poem, you have a couple of chords, you have a half a song, you have a completed song but it needs shaping, you have a song that you think is perfect and you want to record it, I can help you with all of that. I meet you where you are. I will be putting out a special announcement that's a little longer than this little mini announcement that I'm putting at the beginning of each episode in the next couple of weeks. And you'll get to hear more about it. But go to nicktomadio.com/song coaching if you would like to find out more. Let's just get to the topic now. You got through all the public service announcements. The topic this week is Steely Dan, from UGG to hug. So why? Why? I mean, there are a lot of people who would ask me, why am I doing an episode on Steely Dan? But there are a couple of reasons. One, there's a hint there in the title, UGG to hug. I've had a love-hate relationship with Steely Dan for as long as I can remember Steely Dan. And having listened through their entire catalog now, I can say that is still the case. But I will elaborate more on how certain things and aspects of that, in terms of my opinion and my feel for them, have changed. And that's also why I put it UGG to hug and not hug to UGG, which was my original title, which was a little cheeky. And I want to explore the kind of highs and lows of this band. But the main reason I'm doing this, other than I knew I hadn't listened to their catalog, did my chronology of them and wanted to do that to really find out for myself, do I like them, do I love them, whatever, is that they've been in the news lately because kids, young people are into them again. Every few years, they rise in popularity yet again. I remember this when I was in college. This happened. They had been out of the scene for quite a while, but there were friends of mine, a couple of years older maybe, who absolutely loved them and would put them on at parties and things like that. And it was one of those things where I never understood why. And I've thought that exploring them here would help me to understand why were they a college band? Why are they still in many ways a college band? Certain bands like that and the Violent Femmes, and they're year after year, decade after decade, they pop up as college bands no matter how old they are. But also, why are younger people getting into them again? I want to explore that. And so that's kind of the main thing. And my assumption is, at least at the beginning, that people are really into kind of chill, lo-fi music right now. And Steely Dan kind of fits that, just in the same way that yacht rock has become popular again in many ways. But they've also always been a stealth fave in certain quadrants, such as, besides oldies and people who like fusion and college and yacht rock and whatever, hip-hop has gone back to them to sample them. And in fact, the bonus M extra for this week's episode at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre is I go through all of that, the hip-hop samples and samples in non-hip-hop songs, other types of songs, the list of them, and which songs of Steely Dan were used as samples, and my favorites. So that's at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. That's the bonus M extra if you want to learn more about the hip hop acts and other acts who have sampled Steely Dan. Go there. So usual format for this episode, I'll do a brief history of the band, I'll do the discography, and I will include Donald Fagen's and Walter Becker's solo albums, their main solo albums. And then conclusions, of course, which with a special conclusion, which I will get to when I get there, and you'll understand why I say that. The featured song and the questions, as always. And then, of course, after the questions is when the featured song plays. So sources, Wikipedia, The Atlantic, good article there. Whosampled.com, which was mostly for the bonus episode, but, thedowsers.com, Grammy.com, and Google. Which, of course, I cross-check because I don't just believe everything that pops up on Google AI. Disclaimers, as mentioned. In a way, I'm neither a rabid fan nor a fan of much more than their hits, although you'll see if that's changed at all. I do have some bias. But I treat everyone with respect, both the artists and the fans. I will do their solo efforts again, but won't get into their other side stuff like soundtracks and things. I might mention them or whatever, or stuff they played on for other people. That would take too long, as would take too long me mentioning all the people who have played with Steely Dan. You can look that up. And as usual, I'll spend little to no time on their interpersonal things. Anybody who knows anything about Walter Becker in particular, he had some tough times there, especially late 70s into the 80s. Or 70s and the 80s, I guess. I'm not going to really go into much of that because for me, it's about the music, as always. So let's get to the history. Donald Fagen and Walter Becker met in 1967 at Bard College in Annandale-on-Hudson, New York, which is about halfway upstate. We were just upstate, actually, at Bear Mountain. Beautiful up there. I had never been there. A lot of people who live here have been there several times. And we've been upstate before to, Woodstock and Croton-on-Hudson and places like that. This is quite a bit further up, but that's where Bard College is. They played in a bunch of bands, one of which included, believe it or not, Chevy Chase on drums. And then they moved to Brooklyn in 1969, and they tried to sell their tunes at the Brill Building. Now, anyone who's a songwriter, who knows anything about the history of songwriting, has to be slightly thrilled by that. And I have been slightly thrilled by the fact that I have not only passed by the Brill Building many, many times, I was in there. I got to record a voiceover in one of their studios. I might have been in there more than once. I don't honestly remember, which was honestly kind of cool. But anyway, they tried to sell their songs. Didn't do that well, but they were commissioned to do the soundtrack to a movie called You've Gotta Walk It Like You Talk It or You Lose That Beat, featuring Richard Pryor and Robert Downey Sr., which if you saw the documentary that Robert Downey Jr. did and his dad, you know who that is. He's a filmmaker in a sense himself. I did not listen to this soundtrack. Go check it out. Let me know how it is. During this period, around 1968-71, they recorded a bunch of stuff, maybe 25 tunes. And although they've been bootlegged here and there and you can find them, I haven't listened to more than one of them, I believe. They've never been officially released, and it's because Donald Fagen and the late Walter Becker wouldn't authorize their release. And this is a running thing with them about not authorizing or being difficult about authorizing things. These demos, though, are relevant for two reasons. Number one was what I just said. They're very insular. They're very protective. Their persnickety, which not only translates to the business that they did with their music, but to the music itself, I believe. And number two, at least one of these tracks from this, bootlegs was sampled by a hip hop group, which again, I'll talk about in the bonus MXtra at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. Linda Hoover's I Mean to Shine, which was produced by Gary Katz in 1970, featured the two of them and some of their compositions, but it wasn't released until 2022. So they were working together prior to being Steely Dan and on other people's things and writing things for them. There were licensing issues. And again, who had the issues? I don't know. Could it be, Donald Fagen and Walter Becker? I don't know. You look it up. The title track ended up on Streisand's 1971 album, I Mean to Shine. But other success was hard to find for them. So when Gary Katz, who ended up producing almost every one of their albums, or at least every one up until 1980, moved to L.A., he hired them as staff songwriters. And no one liked their stuff. No one could get their song complexity. They were looking for simpler, kind of poppier hits. And ugh, that's an ugh for me. It's also a slight hug, and I'm going to try to rate things as an ugh or a hug or both. And in this case, I'll talk about why it's a bit of an ugh later, but also a hug. So they decided to form their own band, which I empathize with. If you are a writer and you're in somebody else's band and it doesn't fit, in fact, my guest last week said sort of the same thing. Laura Sawaska was saying how she was in a band and maybe pitched a song and there just wasn't the right, fit, or they didn't want to do it. So she did her own. She's been doing her own thing for 6 albums. And I never quite had that. I've always done my own thing. I have pitched my songs to other bands, and some of them have said yes, and we've done them. But as far as them, where they just weren't getting any traction, they needed to form their own band. I totally get that. And they named themselves after a steampunk dildo from the William Burroughs book, Naked Lunch, which is a very famous book. It's also pretty well known at this point that Steely Dan was the name of the dildo. And I mentioned that in the weird band names podfast that I did. This is an ugh for me. This is an ugh for me because, not just because it's the prurient, which I mean, like, I love humor like that when it's done well and it has kind of a layer to it. But it's also an ugh for me because it's overly clever. Oh, we're going to take this, reference. Now, that said, everybody knows the name. Almost everyone, if you don't look it up, has no idea where it comes from, so it worked. So what do I know? All right. The original lineup, Donald Fagen, Walter Becker, Jeff Skunk Baxter on guitar, who went on to play with the Doobie Brothers, Denny Diaz, Jim Hodder on drums, eventually David Palmer a year or so later. Later still Jeff Porcaro, who went on to co-found Toto, and Michael McDonald. Of course, if you don't know Michael McDonald, you probably aren't watching this or listening to this, which is a very weird meta existential thing to say, because if you are, anyway, somebody else explain that to me as well as to all of you. Michael McDonald from the Doobie Brothers and a massive solo career. Everyone who's ever heard his voice associated with the name knows who it is. Also, Royce Jones was also part of the band for a while. And I'm stopping there, again, because there were too many touring and recording musicians to name after that point. They released a single, which I will talk about when I get to the discography section. And so I'm going to gloss over a lot of this history and save it for the discography section because it just fits in there better. They recorded 2 albums with pretty much the same lineup in 1972-73. By 1974, they decided to stop performing live. And their controlling natures, their persnickety natures, turned them into a studio band. This is a hug and an ugh for me. And apparently it's an 8U ugh that I typed here. And it's because, listen, what I've done in the studio, most of it I do myself. Part of it is out of necessity. And part of it is in empathy to them. I know how I want it to sound. I know how I want it to turn out. But that can have varying results. And I will talk about those results in the discography. Their album in 74 was kind of a transition from their original 2-album lineup to the studio, had some holdovers. From their 4th album in 1975 on, they used a revolving and often recurring cast of studio musicians through 1980, releasing 7 albums up to that point. They had a fairly big break from 77 to 80 because they had a lot of misfortune and major personal problems and health problems for Becker, as I alluded to. And then they broke up in 1981. A hiatus, let's say. Becker got clean, so it was a good move for both of them. They each did their own things, which I'll talk about later, more or less, and also worked together here and there throughout that period. But then they stayed on hiatus until 1993 when they got back together. Ironically and refreshingly, their first move upon reuniting was to tour, since they had stopped touring almost 20 years before. Stopped playing live almost 20 years before. They played live for a few years, then took a break to record a new album, which came out in 2000, which again was a 20-year break between 1980 and 2000, their 7th and 8th albums. They did another tour. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in, I believe, 2001, I want to say. And then they did their final album in 2003. They'd release more solo albums after that, pretty much toured consistently until Becker's death from esophageal cancer in 2017, which I actually remember as being a pretty significant event, because one way or another, Steely Dan and the two main dudes were ever present for decades, if not touring or an album, then this just their music. But that hasn't stopped Fagen. Becker's death didn't stop him. He continues to tour as Steely Dan to this day. He took a little break for a health thing, but he's back. But anyway, that's the history. Let's get to the good stuff, which is, for me, the music, discography. As mentioned, the first thing they officially released, it was in June 1972, the single Dallas, the B-side Sail the Waterway. I like Dallas. I can still Palace or something. I don't remember it all, but I remember enough of the melody. And it's interesting to hear somebody else on vocals, Jim Hodder. It's only on YouTube, though. I couldn't find it on streaming, though there is a version by the band Poco on their 1975 album Head Over Heels, and that's actually an excellent cover. So if you don't want to go to YouTube and find Steely Dan's Dallas, then do Poco's Dallas. It's in many ways just as good. In some ways, it's fleshed out even better. What I like about this song is what I have trouble with in most of Steely Dan's catalog, and that is it's a song. It has a structure. Now, it's not to say, I mean, of course, all their songs have a structure. And they're so particular that that's a structure that they devised and executed very well. But there's a certain kind of accessibility to certain structures that a lot of their music was lacking. Not all of it, by any means. A lot of it is super accessible, more so than should be for things that complex. It's quite accessible for something that complex. But what I like about Dallas is it's an interesting song, just as much of their music is, but it has no fat whatsoever. It still has room to breathe, but it gets to the point. Most of their catalog is not this direct, and I think it's in Dallas's favor. But then later that year, November 1972, they released their first album, Can't Buy a Thrill. Now, quick note as a musician. All right, so you hear about bands like the Beatles getting rejected by record companies. Bands like or Tom Petty getting rejected by record companies are always the ones that I remember. So many others who went on to huge fame being rejected by record companies, having failed singles, etc., etc. Like Dallas didn't. I don't even think it charted. Right. Okay. Fine. But let's say if they started playing music in 1967 was the earliest point. Even though they weren't called Steely Dan, they were playing together, they were writing together. 5 years seems like a long time when you're failing, but in hindsight, if any of us indie singer-songwriters and bands and things like that and producers could have a 5-year trajectory of our first album hitting number 17 on the frickin' US charts, I wouldn't call that a very long time to wait. So major success from the very beginning is basically what I'm saying. This album, Can't Buy a Thrill, is more eclectic than most of the albums in their career, I believe, because it's still being influenced by the other band members who would be phased out in a couple of albums. I don't think the album on the whole is their strongest or is stellar, but it's very good, and it's more listenable to me from beginning to end than a lot of their later albums, exactly because it's more varied. They kept it very. Now, some might say, oh, they were looking for their sound. In a way, true. In another way, we all do this. We bounce from, oh, I've found a sound. Now I want to veer off and do this. Or some artists find the sound and never veer, whatever. But if you're kind of a restless artist who's always exploring, this is just one step. I like the eclectic nature. I don't think it was just them trying to find their sound. I think they were exploring things and doing it well. Though I will say one remarkably consistent thing through their entire catalog is the production values. And even though I'm not somebody who needs perfect production, who needs consistent production. Bands I love have had varying production. Then some of it I like, some of it I didn't like. But if I like the songs and the performance, then I didn't care that much. But it is remarkable how consistent their production has been from beginning to end, and good. And not, to me, yes, of course, certain sounds dated, but the way it was produced, not dated. Despite any stylistic changes in the band or trends in the world, super consistent. Both warm, which the 70s is known for, and dry, which 70s was also known for, but they kept that going. And because they didn't do really anything in the 80s as far as recording as a group, they didn't fall prey to the typical 80s reverb and all of that stuff. So that might have been part of the reason. Because when they resumed in the 90s, all that stuff had gotten washed away. So I don't know. It would be interesting to hear what they would have sounded like if they had recorded an album in 1985, is what I'm saying. And it also, this album, this first album, it makes me wish I could have heard what Steely Dan would have sounded like if they continued down this eclectic road. Bouncier, there's more pep, the Latin percussion is great. Sure, characteristic of a lot of stuff like this in the early 70s, but they could have morphed into something, else, really. Side 1 and the first of side 2 are all strong. So much of the rest of this album I wanted to like, but that kind of laconic style and sound overtook any of the writing, and you're going to hear me say that frequently. So, tracks. Number 1, Do It Again, back, Jack, do it again, totally out of key. One of my favorites from theirs, I don't want to do your dirty work. David Palmer sang it, and I love that song as well. Honestly, if somebody had played that for me 2-3 weeks ago, I would not have told you that that was Steely Dan. But I like it. Track 3 is Kings. Track 4, Midnight Cruiser by Hodder. I like this song as well. Pops up in the bonus episode. Number 5, Only a Fool Would Say That. It's about John Lennon. And it's so indicative of the shift from 1960s hope to 1970s cynicism, because it's basically saying Lennon has a pie in the sky view of, imagine there's no heaven, whatever, we could all be as one. And Donald Fagen is saying, basically, fuck you. Like, you are too pie in the sky. You're not realistic, whatever. So, listen, I think there's a balance between the two. This kind of biting nature of the lyrics of Steely Dan songs can work in their favor and work against their favor, especially if you're not a huge fan. I honestly kind of do like this song, but to me, it's despite the message. Oh, side 2, Reelin' in the Years. Come on. I used to think this was the Doobie Brothers, really for years, or I forgot and would confuse it with its Doobie Brothers. Either way, great song. And then there were 4 more songs on the album which were not favorites of mine, written by Fagen and Palmer, and the last one by Becker, etc. And that brings us to 1973 album released in July, Countdown to Ecstasy, which really reached 35. Which, okay, the first one was 17, second one 35. You could think, that's it. And of course it wasn't. But that happened often to a lot of bands where if it was just slightly not as good, chart-wise, the record label would drop them or they wouldn't put much money behind them. So much of Steely Dan's lyrics and titles and their name itself alludes to sex. Countdown to Ecstasy, Can't Buy a Thrill. Now, of course, there are double meanings to all these. That's great. But it's interesting that they constantly went back to this, at least through 1980 anyway. And listen, I won't judge because I don't think that alluding to sex is a bad thing. I do think some of their lyrics were a little bit aggressive toward the female character, but I don't know the background enough of any of them to, pass judgment on that. Essentially. And I know a lot of their lyrics tackled other things, and I know they did lyrically evolve, especially after, like when they took that hiatus and did their solo stuff, Recording wise, what was it? Countdown to Ecstasy is grittier and it's jazzier, but still very much of a piece with the first album. it was recorded where Chicago did lots of their recordings from this point on at James William Garcio's Caribou Ranch. And that's probably why I like the sound of this album, maybe more than any of their albums. As far as sound-wise, it's not my favorite album. This album doesn't really take off for me, which apparently not as much for other people either. But I love Chicago, so it was cool to find out that they recorded that there. First song is Bodhisattva, and I know this because it was on a Greatest Hits compilation. And I assumed it was a single and assumed it was a hit, and it was not. Bodhisattva, to take it by the hand. I don't remember the lyrics, something about China or whatever. Great song, though. Great song. Razor Boy, number 2, also very nice. There's 2 more songs on side 1 that are quite long, and there you go. Not my favorites. Number 5, Showbiz Kids, was a single. And not a fave, but apparently enough of a fave to be used as a sample for more than one artist. My Old School, never going back to my own school. That's wrong, but who cares? Great single, love it. And then Pearl of the Quarter is not a fave. King of the World ends this album, and it was a real freaking discovery for me. I love this song. One of the few non-single favorites, Steely Dan for me. Great echoey guitar riffs. The use of the ARP synth, perfect. I so wish they had incorporated more of this sound in their future stuff. Probably because it sounds like if Chicago and the Dewey Brothers had a baby, whatever. And Chicago's a favorite of mine. We're going to do one more album before we take a break, and that is a big one for them. February 1974's Pretzel Logic went to number 8. Yes, not their top, but close to it. It was a pivot album. And as I mentioned, it was the last one recorded with the original members and touring and the people who toured with them. And the last one that included any touring. And it was the first where Donald Fagen and Walter Becker asserted their dominance and further shaped the sound. So it had a bit of their early, before and a bit of their after approach to it. I much prefer the range on this one than on the previous album. And honestly, this is the most listenable and energetic, not only of the first 3 albums, but it is my favorite Steely Dan album. I go on record as saying Pretzel Logic is my favorite. And it's no surprise because I tend to like the pivot albums like The Police's Zenyatta Mondatta, the U2's Unforgettable Fire, The Cure's Head on the Door, Prince's, let's say, Around the World in the Day of Parade. There was no song I didn't enjoy, but let's talk about my favorite tracks. Ricky, Don't Lose That Number. You don't have to call anybody else or something. Hit number 4. It's the most successful single of theirs ever. Second song, Night by Night. Love it. Any major dude will tell you. Love it. Barrytown, used as a sample. Or no, it was, I believe Ben Folds covered it or whatever. I don't like the song. East St. Louis Toodaloo was a nice cover of a Duke Ellington song, or was co-written by Duke Ellington. Parker's Band is Through with Buzz, nice arrangement, especially the strings. Pretzel Logic, the title track, the other single. I like it. It's not my favorite single of theirs, but I do like it. With a Gun is a very folksy song, almost Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, and I like it because of that. Charlie Freak, great piano, great production in general, and driving. The energy on this album in general is great, I think. And then it ends with Monkey in Your Soul, which good for them. And I'm going to end this half right here and say that we will be back in, I just timed the mid-roll early for, I can't even tell you the tech issues I've had this week. And I had to time it. And it's actually less than a minute. So I will see you in less than a minute. Hey, thanks for checking out this episode of Music is Not a Genre. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, if you'd like to learn more about the music I do with my band Rec or any other projects or anything else about me, go to nickdematteo.com. That's Nick, DEMATTEO.com. And everything is there. There's even a link to a merch store where you can get t-shirts and mugs and hats and totes and notebooks and so many other things. I'm always adding new products there. Great way to support the podcast. And finally, go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre if you'd really like to show your support. My fans and lovely family there get exclusives and other perks and early releases, and they get to suggest topics for future podcasts as well. Thanks for listening to the mid-roll. Now back to the show. All right, we are back going through Steely Dan's discography, their primary discography. As you know, when I do discographies, I don't dwell on most live albums or most compilations unless there's something new on one of them. So that's kind of what I did here, of course, too. So that brings us to their, where are we? Is this the fourth album? Geez, I lost count. So their fourth album. It is 1975's Katy Lied, released in March of that year. Again, female references. Woman didn't do something nice. That happens a lot in their lyrics. This album went to number 13. I never would have told you that Steely Dan released an album called Katy Lied. Period. End of story until I did this research. But again, I'm glad I did. This is when Michael McDonald comes in, which I didn't know. He did so much work with them. And yes, he did. This album, Katy Lied, is the perfect example of why I have such a hard time loving this band. This is an UGG for me. All right. Way too far in the clever to be clever direction with not enough oomph, not enough hook. It's almost intolerable. In part because it ironed out a lot of the energy and variety of the first three albums. Essentially, it went full on into yacht rock and watered down blues, which they would then keep in their repertoire forever. This is nowhere near a favorite of mine. In fact, it may be at the bottom. I will rank albums, and later on and towards the end of this episode, I'll tell you my top favorite albums and some of my favorite songs. But I didn't do all 9 of their albums. I can just say that this is probably 8 or 9 in terms of ranking for me. The first track on the album, Black Friday, was a single. It's a good one. Very good song, actually. I liked it. I had never really heard it before. Maybe I did and forgot it. But either way, this is the peak of their energy on this album as far as I'm concerned. Bad Sneakers was their second single. I'm not a fan of it, but you'll hear more about it in the bonus episode. Rose Darling, no. Daddy Don't Live in That New York City No More, no. Dr. Wu, no. Side 2, Everyone's Gone to the Movies. Nice atmosphere. It's not the strongest song for me, but I love how it sounds. They talk about little underage women, or I think something like that. I don't know, again, with the women, but that's fine. Listen, it can get very kind of like curdled milk listening to a lot of this, but then you can grow to love it. But then when lyrics like that pop out, it curdles again. So it's, again, this is a real hug to hug, to hug, and whatever. But this was a song that will pop up in the bonus as well. Your Gold Teeth 2, Chain Lightning is nice. And the last two, not a fave of mine either. One, which brings us to May 1976, The Royal Scam is their 5th album. Am I losing count? No, I think that is their, that's their 5th album. That's right. Went to number 15 in the U.S. So, listen, I talk about their, chart success later on in this episode. It is pretty incredible. More energy than Katy Lied. Definitely a bounce back from Katy Lied. It's as listenable to me as Pretzel Logic. They were learning how to do that insular studio thing better by still keeping it fresh, by still keeping it lively, As far as the classic Steely Dan song, and I consider the first 2 albums phase 1. The 3rd and 4th are the transitional albums to me. And then this and the next album are prime Steely Dan. And as far as prime Steely Dan, this is my favorite. This is probably my second favorite album of theirs overall, though I don't remember how I ranked them later on. The Royal Scam. Again, wouldn't have told you that was the name of one of their albums, and I actually really like it. Number 1, Kid Charlemagne, great single. Number 2, The Caves of Altamira, also really good, and it has a sax solo that doesn't suck. A lot of sax solos are great, to be honest, but it came to a point where sax was overused in the late 70s into the 80s. And, well, Didn't happen really till the 80s. But this was great. Great sax solo. Number 3, Don't Take Me Alive. No, I don't love the song, but freaking Larry Carlton on guitar just kicks ass, and he's all over this album. 4, Silent Stranger, not a fan. 5, The Fez. Becker Fagan and Paul Griffin, one of only, I think, 2 songs that were co-written by someone other than Fagan and Becker from their, 3rd, 4th album, whatever. I don't know. I think whatever I read was not necessarily correct, but let's just say they wrote almost all their stuff after, let's say, the 3rd album, starting with the 3rd album. But The Fez is an awesome single. And again, there's a sex reference, but it's cheeky. Never gonna do it without Fez on. And hadn't remembered this song, but when I reheard it for this research, I just fell in love with it. Some of my favorite lyrics, partly because the lyrics are sparing, this is interesting to me. And I do have to respect this about them because I do the same thing. My lyrics can go from really, really simple and sparing and repetitive on purpose to very complex and longer, even though they never veer into poetic because I left that behind a long time ago. And I don't think that the Steely Dan's lyrics veer into treacly or poetic either. So again, I do have some respect there. And there might be a love-hate, an ugh and hug for me with Steely Dan because there's certain things they do that are too close to the vest for me. It's like staring at yourself in the mirror for too long. Not that I sound anything like them, but in terms of certain ways they approach music. But The Fez is funky and it's weird and it's hooky. Side 2 starts with Green Earrings. This is another discovery of a song I know I have not heard before. That is one of my absolute favorites of theirs. Green Earrings, starting side 2 on the Royal Scam. Did I say this was the Royal Scam? Jiminy Cricket. Yeah. Sounds so much like Chicago, and that's probably why I like it. It's one of my all-time faves from them now. Just brand new all-time faves, along with King of the World. Haitian Divorce was their 3rd single. Not a fan. Everything You Did is a song. The Royal Scam titled track, very good. And Larry Carlton, again, just rips it apart. And great horns, again. And it's just odd enough and just sparing enough and just clever enough it doesn't overdo it. And this is one of the things about them, that when they didn't take it over that, they didn't jump that shark, let's say, it worked so well. And this song does. Which brings us to September 1977. Aha. Funny joke. US number 3, their most successful album, and their most critically acclaimed album. And usually at or near the top of everybody's list of what are the best Steely Dan albums. This is supposedly their peak. It's also the height of the yacht rock era, and they do not disappoint on this album. I've said that I can't stand music that relies on being tasteful. I like music that is tasteful when tastefulness is called for and it works. But when the whole thing you're doing is it's just tasteful. I honestly, if it's not a good song or an interesting song or performance, then I don't care how tasteful it is. And that, to me, is what most of this album is. And this is a real controversy because I know how much people love this album. And there are songs in this album I absolutely love. But this is not one of my favorite albums of theirs. It's definitely in the bottom half. For me, it might be 6th or 7th, to be honest. Most of this album is overbaked, to my estimation. The songs are self-indulgent. They go on too long. Now, then again, people like this stuff. That's why they do it. That's why they listen to it. People listen to it. But great musicianship, great production. You can't deny it. Some great songs. But honestly, by 77, even Chicago, who was not at their peak, had more range than this album did. Black Cow, I'll mention that in the bonus. Title track, neither of those are favorites of mine. Deacon Blues, one of my all-time favorites of theirs. One of my all-time favorites, and deserves to be as long as it is. I just love this song. I don't remember all the lyrics, of course, but they call Alabama Crimson Tide, Call Me Deacon. I remember almost the entire chorus every single year, even if I hadn't heard it for decades. And then side be. Starts with Peg. Dear God. Top 3 for me, Steely Dan songs. Maybe the top overall, but definitely top 3. Funny thing is, when I first heard this song, I used to think they were saying, hey, it will come back to you. And then I met and dated and married somebody whose nickname, Margaret, whose nickname was Peg, and learned very quickly that they were singing Peg and not Hey. And it was, famously sampled by De La Soul. Again, bonus MxG video, patreon.com/music is not a genre. I talk about that and many others, samples and hip-hop and non-hip-hop songs. But such a great song. Such a great song. And then Home at Last, and I Got the News. Okay. Josie, another great single, but it's sort of like the other single I mentioned, which is escaping me right now. I like it, but it's not a fave. Good song, but not a fave. Then they took that break due to issues. And so after having released one album every year from 72 to 77, that's 6 albums if you're counting, their 7th album took 3 years to come out. And that was November 1980's Gaucho. It went to number 9 in the U.S., so again, super successful. To me, this is more interesting than Aha. It's got more drive. It's got more range. I don't think it's as interesting as some of my earlier favorites of theirs, but it's still better to me than, Aha and their second album. It's more smooth jazz than straight ahead jazz, as a lot of their stuff was. And if you've listened to any of my other episodes, you may have heard me mention I can't stand smooth jazz. Now, I say that, and there are certain smooth jazz songs I do like Chuck Mangione is a favorite of mine, whatever. But most of it is not my bag of balls. But of course, I like the production better because this is right in my sweet spot. 1980, my favorite production period, 78 to 82. One of my favorites. I have others. At a certain point, the thing is this: if all the songs in an album are close to the same tempo, it doesn't matter how good the songs are. It doesn't matter how good the album is. It's lulling you like this. I have the same issue with albums that are all like meant to be dance, 130 to 140 or 120 to 140 or whatever that range is. If you're not going to throw in something that's half speed or that goes to 160, it just is incessant. And so many of Steely Dan's albums keep to that mid-tempo range, to the point where even if there's a song in there that's an absolute gem, I think I might have been lulled into not liking it. But still, overall, Gaucho, good album, worth a listen. Maybe top 5 for me, maybe the 5th of the top 5, I don't know, but definitely not in the bottom. Babylon Sisters opens the album, it's first single, I'm not a fan of it. Hey 19 is their other single, as good as any of their other singles from the 70s. Honestly, great use of Michael McDonald, absolutely classic backup vocals. It's just such a good freaking song. And then you have Glamour Profession. And side 2 starts with the title track. It's fine. 5, Time Out of Mind, not to be confused with Dylan. It's another good single. And I love the unison backup vocals. I'm a fan of those. I put them on my song All On Me on Rex's album Kite to Camden because of songs like this. Not that I knew this song, but songs like this. Time Out of Mind. Then there's My Rival, not a fan. Third World Man, also decent song. And then 1981, as I mentioned in the history, they broke up. So let's get into some of their solo stuff then. 1982, Donald Fagen released his first solo album, The Night Fly. It went to number 11. Oh, amazing. So many stylistic and atmospheric similarities to Steely Dan, and yet clearly also quite different. It's more positive. And I'm sure some of that is due to the fact that this is really their first proper recording in the 1980s, because Gaucho was all, or in part or mostly or all, recorded in the late 70s. So trends played a factor, and because I like that period before the 80s blew up, it's one reason why I like how the song, and yeah, more positive about the game. It's less dense in a good way to me, kind of lightens things up. That first IGY, incredible single. What a wonderful world this could be. No, it's the wrong words. Whatever. Glorious time to be free. You could have thrown 400 stones at me, and at times I want you to. I haven't gone through this. I wouldn't have been able to tell you that Donald Fagen did IGY. And yet I know it as well as I know so many of those other hit songs in 1982. It's a hit song. It's great. And then Green Flower Street, Ruby Baby is another single I vaguely remember, but not a fan. Then Maxine. And side 2 is New Frontier. That was another single, not a fan. The Night Flies, the title track, The Goodbye Look, that Latin shuffle beat. I don't know if it's a samba, rumba, whatever. It's a bit too in the pocket, but yet, for some reason, I really like this song, The Goodbye Look. And then Walk Between Raindrops. I'd rather walk between raindrops than listen to the song. And then they did some stuff together and apart after that album. I'm not going to go into it other than Rosie Vella's debut album, Zazu, in 1986. They both played on that. And I think they might have contributed songs. I don't recall. Suffice it to say, they're doing fine. They were keeping active. Walter Becker had bounced back and all that stuff. Which brings us to the 90s. A lot of time to spend not releasing things. 1993, Kamakiriad went to number 10. It's Fagen's second album and considered a sequel to the first album. You can fully understand why I mentioned the thing before about how their production was warm and dry at the same time, because other than that 82 album, which was still early enough to be dry, they skipped the 80s. And 93 comes, and people are into warm and dry again, right? So Kamakiriad, you can see why Steely Dan's music fits so well into that era, right? Because the 90s were kind of the 70s wannabe decade anyway. There are people who don't know history as well who will say to a fashion thing or a music thing, oh, that's so 90s, when if you live through it and you're old enough to remember, you realize that that thing that was so 90s is actually so 70s. And, it's kind of fun either way. I either love or hate the idea of a concept album about a futuristic car and driver, but kind of cool that he did that. It's a hug and an hug, I guess. Becker is on this album, as Fagen would be on Becker's album the following year. There's some interesting stuff here. The album does pick up energy as it goes. But again, the biggest issue is one I have with lots of artists who kind of stay up in their own hole, let's say. And that is they seemingly stop listening to any new music. Like overall, it's too samey for me. But if that's what you do, it's what you do, right? First song, Transistor Sky, was a single. Counter Moon, not bad. Springtime, also not bad. Snowbound, best track on the album as far as I'm concerned, and it was the top single. Tomorrow's Girls, also good. Good vocals, good energy. And then a few more songs on the album, which I don't need to mention. Following year, 94, Becker released his debut solo album, 11 Tracks of Whack. It didn't chart, but points for a great title and a very non-Steely Dan title. Although, I don't know, is that also supposed to be some kind of a sex reference? You tell me. Refreshing, though. It shows what a heavy hand Donald Fagen wielded on Steely Dan. Maybe Becker must have been okay with that because they never necessarily, came to blows about it that I know of. There's so much energy. It's quite different from Steely Dan as far as I'm concerned. There's a tinge of 1980s holdover in the production, but overall, it makes me wish that Becker had more influence over Steely Dan's sound and direction, or at least broadened their range more from what the that kind of middle of the road easy listening, the doldrums. It's more progressive, but more in touch with the current time than Fagen's work. As with all of this music, barring a few times, could have used some editing, a little long in many ways, in many places, but overall, it's my favorite solo album of any of theirs. 11 Tracks of Whack is my favorite solo album of anything that the two of them did. Down in the Bottom, good song. Junkie Girl, also good. Varying sound and tempo. Surf and or Die again. Nice change of pace. Atmospheric. Then there's 4 Book of Liars. Lucky Henry, great mix of simple and complex, and reminds me a bit of Ty Tabor's solo stuff from King's X. And then going down, number 8, Girlfriend, sounds like Drum Machine. I think, good song. Number 11, Hat Too Flat. Cool diversion, weird, but it holds together. And final track, Little Kawaii. Nice down-home change of pace, and I love the IHOP reference. So now we get back to when they reunited as Steely Dan in the mid-90s. And finally, or early mid-90s, put out another album. February 2002, Against Nature, went to number 6. It's their second highest chart position. Picks up from the big break, but it's more cohesive. It's still idiosyncratic, but it nods to tightness. It nods to hooks. They've learned a few things. They've evolved. Best vocals of any album thus far. All the touring and maturing and experience shows. Way more variation, and the snares pop like hell. This is I'll tell you where this ranks in my favorites. Gaslighting Abby, nice song. What a Shame About Me, old school and very nice. It was a promotional single. Title track 2, Against Nature, good change of pace, even if it's a little slight. It sounds too much like latter-day Chicago to me, although this is better than latter-day Chicago. Try to recapture old energy without any renewal, but it's still better than what they did at that period. Janie Runaway, nice. Great horns, another promo single. Almost Gothic, also nice. Jack of Speed, promo single, not a fave. Cousin Dupree was the only single that charted, but it was on the U.S. Adult Contemporary at 30. Good energy, but a little too smooth for me. Negative Girls, West of Hollywood, I like where this goes, even if it's too long. And in June 2003, they released their final album, Everything Must Go, which charted at number 9. And it was the only one of their albums not to go gold. It's kind of too far in the previous album's direction, but it's a worthy effort, and it's maybe their most straightforward album of all. It's the least complexity, and for them, that's saying something. It's almost pop. It's definitely more energy and brighter tonally. Many critics rank this at the bottom, but I disagree with most critics, and they probably rank it there for 2 reasons. One, it's a latter-day album, and those are looked down on for every artist, Oh, the classic period. So many latter-day albums are as good as early stuff. I won't say this one is, but so many from so many artists are as good as earlier stuff, but it's not looked on the same because it's not their popular period. I think this is solidly in the middle. Anyway, the only songs I really like on this, number 4, Godwhacker. 5, Slang of Ages, which is nice to hear Becker sing. Number 7, Pixeline is my favorite on the album. It moves, and I like it a lot. 8, Lunch with Gina. I love these lyrics. This is one thing where they found a way in their latter day to continue to be clever, but not overly clever, which is, to me, good. It's my second favorite on the album. Title track, nice ending. Everything Must Go. Leaning more into actual jazz, which is always a good thing for me. So, last one of their albums. But 2006, Fagen releases his third, Morph the Cat, which went to US number 26. It's the third of the trilogy as well, I believe. Already a better sound and start and fuller and a better mix than his previous album. But again, it's so same, and the tempo is the same. And it starts to grate on you. What I Do is track 3. I like this. I wish more of their 70s stuff was like this. The middle of the road 70s stuff. 6, Security Joan. Good one. Not a masterpiece, but I do like it. Number 9, Morph the Cat Reprise is actually better than the actual title track. It's super crispy and funky, and it's my favorite on the album. 2 years later, in 2008, Becker released Circus Monkey. Didn't chart. It's not as interesting as his first album, but still solid. Still a nice change from Fagen. Lyrics are clever, but not as ornately clever as Donald Fagen. They're more accessible. I expected the first song to be boilerplate, Steely Dan, yacht rock, but it's a bit more subtle and subversive than that. Other than that, not a lot stood out, especially because of the white rockers' obsession with watered-down reggae. I mean, that can only go so far with me and anyone. But there are some things I did like. Door Number 2, that top track, not bad. Do You Remember the Name? Later down on the album, dark and nice take on reggae, even if it does drag a bit, because most, watered down reggae does. Somebody's Saturday Night, pretty good. His lyrical repetition in this and other songs is very, very welcome. 3 Picture Deals, a nice mix of piano, jazz, and rocksteady is what I would call it. And then Dark Horse Dub is the bonus, I believe. It's a good representation of dub, actually, and probably my favorite on the album. Final album here, 2012, Sunken Condos. Fagen's last album so far went to number 12. It's almost a neo-soul production. I really like the production. It's a real improvement from the 2006 album. New feels, new sounds, shows some evolution, shows he's been listening to things. The lyrics pop more. This is my second favorite of all of their solo albums. Slinky Thing opens the album. It's the best of his since his 1982 single, IGY, and I love the bass on this. 2, I'm Not the Same Without You is a nice change of pace and some funny lyrics, and it was big in Japan, no joke. Going down, the 5, The New Breed, very good. Great, Neo Soul production. 6, Out of the Ghetto, is an Isaac Hayes cover, and it's very good. And those are my faves from the album. So we're towards the end, and this will run slightly longer, this episode, but keep with me. We're getting towards the end. Before I get to conclusions, I want to make this pre-conclusion comment. And that is, what I've done here, yet again, is I've reviewed music that's not my favorite. I did an episode on country music. I did an episode on Christian pop music. They are not my favorites. I dug into them. And the comment really I have on this is a question. It's for you. How can we appreciate and give respect to things that don't fit us or that we don't understand? This goes beyond music, this question. How can we appreciate and give respect to things that don't fit us or that we don't understand? Let's start with the music. The majority of people I run into have trouble respecting music they don't like. Or they might respect it, they don't have the time or energy to understand it in any way. And that's fine. It's music, it's personal, but that bothers me. Which makes their criticisms, though, less valid, lacking context, frequently inaccurate, and often highly overblown. I don't like to talk about stuff I haven't looked into and researched. So if somebody said, what's your opinion of Creed? Yeah, I'm going to say, offhand, don't like them, but I only say that because a lot of people don't. I'm not going to say that as an educated opinion about them. All right? But there have been times where I've been casually, tossing off, Kid Rock sucks. It's a big joke with me. There are a couple songs of his I like. I don't know the rest of his catalog, so I don't know how good or bad he is. And I can say that and be honest about it. What I always try to do, especially for these episodes, is take the music at face value. And actual fans of the stuff I do that isn't my bag of beans have often commented on how much they love my sense of discovery and overall respect I give to the music, even if I'm not into it. And that's because I don't just judge based on a few singles or what critics say is their best or any conventional wisdom. It's not interesting to me. It's why I often disagree with lists and other assessments. I dig in, I explore it all, I give you my honest, educated opinion on all of it as a musician and as a listener. I get as much context as possible. I also stay away, though, from relying on true fans because their bias often goes too far in the other direction. And it's hard to gain entry into their line of thinking from the outside. I know that if somebody were to say to me, you two, don't ask me to be critical of them. There are things of theirs I don't love, but there's nothing I don't like. And that's not fair because there are people who aren't fans of you too. Well, how are they going to know what's good enough from a fan, from a rabid fan? Now imagine this attitude being spread beyond music and beyond the arts. Let's say you hear about a topic like gender reassignment surgery, and that it really rubs you the wrong way. Not a fan, and you get angry. If you judge it based on sound bites and memes and, biased sources in particular, and your own biases and emotions, you're 100% likely to get some or all of it wrong. Just period. Period. Don't allow your emotions to rule your judgment. You're not going to do justice to the topic or the people involved. You're not going to respect it or the people who agree with it. And you're going to dismiss it without giving it a chance. Right? I've known about Steely Dan for decades, and I realized I was judging them based on a few singles and some rabid fans who annoyed me, and some articles and reviews that I agreed or disagree with. I knew that to do Steely Dan justice, I needed to give them an actual chance, which is what I did. And what I'm saying here, and what I'm asking you to do, is give things you disagree with a fair chance. Explore them enough to really know them as far inside as you can get before you judge them. And even if it doesn't sway your opinion, I'm not sure my exploration of Steely Dan swayed me. At least your opinion will be deeper and more well-rounded, more contextual and more informed. Then any talk you have with fans of the topic or the music or whatever will be more of a discussion and less of a shouting match, I'm right, you're wrong. So PSA over, let's get to the actual conclusions. My original subtitle for this episode was Why Now? Why Ever? To punch up two things. Why did they do so well in their heyday, and why are they popular yet again? Well, the second question, again, I think because this yacht rock, easy listening, chill, lo-fi style of music that's been popular for a while, although it's somewhat phasing out, no triggers, etc., A lot of their songs sound like that, and you could see why people would like it who are into that kind of music. Also, they've been sampled by hip-hop artists. Again, the bonus MXtra, patreon.com/music is not a genre, is me going through a lot of those samples. But that gives them a little bit of a cool factor. To the first, why were they popular? They actually did good music, and it was an antidote to 70s rock and all the bluster. It had its own bluster, but whatever. It was more complex than typical yacht rock. Nothing they did was bad, per se. I'm going to go on record as saying nothing they did was bad, and that's hard to say about any artist. But a lot of it was overindulgent. Not all of it, certainly, and maybe not most of it. Their singles are almost all excellent to me. In my favorites in chronological order, Do It Again, Reelin' in the Years, My Old School, Bodhisattva, not a single, but whatever. King of the World, same thing, not a single. Ricky Don't Lose That Number, Kid Charlemagne, The Fez, Green Earrings, not a single, but a favorite. Deacon Blues, Peg, Hey 19, and I got to put in Fagen's solo hit, IGI, What a Beautiful World. Man, love that song. My top albums, number 3, Two Against Nature. So, shock, surprise, their 2000 album. Number 2, The Royal, Scam, great album. And number 1 is Pretzel Logic. I don't know what the rest are, but I know again that Aha is not in the top 5. My overall take, Ugh and Hug, because even though they were broken up in the 1980s and didn't release anything new for most of that decade, they were everywhere and a real staple of my college years. And even though I couldn't say that I hated the music, as you heard, I actually liked quite a few of their songs, the fact that everyone else was into them really annoyed somebody who was into contemporary music of the time. Punk and hip hop and new wave and all that stuff and college rock. And the fact that people are doing the same thing again today is kind of annoying me, and for the same reason, because it's like so few younger people are able to absorb music with an edge. That is a generalization because there are a lot of younger people now who are getting into some really hard ass music. Look up a band called Knocked Loose. That will knock some things loose in your body. But lyrically, their Steely Dan had quite a bit of bite, and a lot of that bite worked. And that's one thing that's a hug for me. Another one, great harmonies. Love layered harmonies. Love the production and sound. Love the musicianship. I love the unexpected twists and changes in rhythm and harmony, chord changes. Very little seemed gratuitous when it worked. And it was remarkable how successful every one of their albums and almost every single was. Other than Countdown to Ecstasy and a few of their solo albums, every single other album charted in the top 20, and most were in the top 10. Also a hug is the songs really stick in your head. You know, while I was doing this research, every night I'd go to bed or wake up and one of their songs was in my head. It just happens. It's in my head right now. Peg. The music is kind of timeless because they did their own thing despite most trends. Also, it's almost always soothing and comforting, and sometimes you need that. That's, I think, why a lot of people dig on them today. What was a meh? Neither a hug nor an ugh. Artfully disguised whining about women in the world. Not a fan, though often they did have good things to say. Clever lyrics got a little too clever too often, including the titles and the actual name of the freaking band. All that over-arty, pseudo-off-the-cuff cleverness is exemplified by their very name and so many other of their lyrics. Also, there's not one critic I agree with in ranking their albums, and it's often not even close. Most lists suffer from the heavy hand of conventional wisdom anyway. So lots of the music's too samey in tone and tempo, though that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a meh for me. They more or less pioneered yacht rock, which is good and bad, right? I'm rarely a fan of California production values. And so even though I like the warm and dry, there's certain aspects of how things are arranged that get on my nerves. I'm very East Coast. What's an ugh for me? Listen, everyone's flavor of fusion is different. I like Chicago. I like acid jazz. I like funk fusion. I like some prog fusion. I like electro fusion. Steely Dan is too smooth jazz fusion for me. It just is. It's like if someone was putting like, oh, this wonderful oil on your face and it felt so good, but then they just did it for 3 days straight. That's what their music feels like for me. It just starts out feeling so great, and then it's like... So some people like that, right? They did everything light. Prog light, rock light, jazz light, blues light, country light, pop light, Latin light. Almost never went to the nth degree in any genre, although they did sometimes. Big issue is this. Rebellion against rebellion is not rebellion. I've said it before. It's being a reactionary. And while I like the results of some of this anti-rebellion, some of the Steely Dan work, some soft rock, some lo-fi music, some post-rock, the movements behind all of these really irk the motherfuck out of me because they take it to extremes and they do it like they're being bold. It's not bold to be timid. And I don't mean timid like sensitive, or show your weakness. I love that. This is not bold, though I'm sure some fans would say that was the point, and then that in itself is bold. The problems with my assessments, other than their almost pure opinion, is this band was never for me, and I admit that. It's like I stepped into the middle of somebody else's fetish. And yet, I like so much of it, quite a bit of it. I'm also judging them against the Doobie Brothers, and especially Chicago, both of whom I liked better. Both of whom rocked harder. The best part of them for me is they help to make complexity more acceptable in pop and mainstream music, something I like to do in my music. I make it both accessible and complex in ways. And their sound is kind of insularly kitschy and enduring enough to have been sampled often. Again, the bonus MXtra at patreon.com/musicisnotAgenre is hip-hop songs that sampled Steely Dan, Tops, and others. Featured, which brings me to the featured song. All right. I gotta say, nothing I've done sounds like Steely Dan. A couple things like Sense of or Sing Out with OWWT have those elements. Go listen to them. It's because nothing was directly influenced by them. But as per above the complexity comment, they were an indirect influence on me. I've often thrown in complexities that usually aren't picked up on because the song itself is so cohesive and hooky, but I like them in there. I've also often thrown in jazzy, bluesy chords, even in non-jazzy, bluesy songs. One thing I haven't explored much is lo-fi as it's defined now. I tried, didn't work. So after debating which song I haven't used yet to include here, I'm going to go with an instrumental. Of all things, partly because nothing I do really fits, but also because it sort of has that feel of being hip-hop adjacent and kitschy. It sounds like some of that. It sounds like indie and electronic tracks that have sampled Steely Dan. From my side project / production name, The Drop, the album long held Grudges, and it's the track Flunky Fesh, which you'll hear in a minute or two. It's one of the newest songs on the album. It's kitschy in the way much of Steely Dan's music is, but also catchy in the way a lot of it is funky and weird. Also like that. Though, let's be honest, it doesn't really sound like them. I'm not going to say it does, but you can see the adjacentness of it. Anyway, that's the featured song coming up soon. Questions. Are you a fan of the Dan? Or do you just know the hits like I did? Can you not stand them? Like so many people. Do you think they deserve a place in the pantheon of great 1970s artists? Why do you think they're so popular again? I want to know the answers to all of these because my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you for watching and listening. Stay tuned for the featured song, and I will talk to you next week.